How secure is Europe in the face of nuclear threats? Is nuclear deterrence still relevant in today's world? These questions have been thrust back into the limelight as new developments appear on the horizon. Europe, a continent that has witnessed the horrors of two world wars, finds itself once again in the crosshairs of potential nuclear confrontation. This isn't a plot of a Cold War thriller but today's reality. We've seen a surge of activity in recent times. Russia, a major player on the global stage, has moved nuclear weapons into Belarus, an action that has surely sent ripples of concern across the European continent. But it doesn't stop there. Belarus, a country that had previously never declared an intention to use nuclear weapons in its military doctrine, has done just that. This is a significant shift, one that has undoubtedly raised eyebrows and escalated tensions. Meanwhile, Poland, a NATO member, has expressed interest in hosting nuclear weapons under NATO's nuclear sharing policy. This move could be seen as a counterbalance to the Russian and Belarusian actions, an attempt to maintain the delicate equilibrium of power that has kept the peace in Europe for decades. These are major developments, events that could shape the future of the continent and the world at large. They've sparked fresh debates and discussions on the relevance of nuclear deterrence in Europe. Is it an outdated concept, a relic of the Cold War era? Or is it a necessary evil, a tool to maintain peace and security in an increasingly unpredictable world? These recent developments have sparked a fresh debate on the relevance and effectiveness of nuclear deterrence in Europe. The stakes are high, and the answers to these questions could very well determine the future of peace and security on the continent. To understand the current state, it is essential to delve into the history of nuclear deterrence in Europe. The story of nuclear deterrence in Europe is a fascinating one, marked by periods of intense skepticism and protest, particularly during the 70s and 80s. It was a time when the Cold War was at its peak, and the threat of nuclear conflict loomed large over the continent. In this era, Western European countries witnessed widespread protests against the deployment of new nuclear weapons. These protests were not just a manifestation of fear or anti-war sentiment. They were a reflection of deep-seated public skepticism about nuclear deterrence. People questioned the morality and the very concept of using the threat of nuclear annihilation as a means of preserving peace. This skepticism was not limited to the public, it permeated into political and academic circles as well, sparking heated debates and discussions. The 70s and 80s were a time when the concept of nuclear deterrence was put to the test. The deployment of new nuclear weapons in Europe was seen by many as an escalation of the nuclear arms race rather than a deterrent. This period saw the emergence of the peace movement, which advocated for nuclear disarmament and the de-escalation of Cold War tensions. It's important to remember that this skepticism wasn't unfounded. The destructive power of nuclear weapons, as demonstrated in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, was a stark reminder of the potential consequences of a nuclear conflict. The fear and skepticism of the 70s and 80s were responses to a very real and terrifying possibility. The historical skepticism towards nuclear deterrence has shaped the current attitudes and strategies. It has left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of Europe, influencing debates, policies, and attitudes towards nuclear weapons and deterrence to this day. While the dynamics have changed, the lessons from this part of history continue to resonate in the present. In recent years, there has been a noticeable shift in attitudes towards nuclear deterrence in Europe. This shift, it seems, is spurred by a complex interplay of geopolitical developments and public sentiment. Let's start with the public sentiment. There was a time, back in the 70s and 80s, when the deployment of new nuclear weapons was met with widespread protests in Western Europe. The public was skeptical and, quite frankly, afraid. But fast forward to today and we see a different picture. Recent surveys point to a rather substantial portion of the European public actually favoring the withdrawal of nuclear weapons from Europe. That's quite the turnaround, isn't it? But public sentiment is just one piece of the puzzle. The political landscape has also played its part in this shift. And here, the Russian invasion of Ukraine stands out as a significant catalyst. This event has led to an increase in support for the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons. It's a sobering reminder of the real-world implications of geopolitical tensions and the role of nuclear deterrence in maintaining a balance of power. Interestingly, this growing support for nuclear deterrence isn't mirrored in attitudes towards conventional military expenditures. In fact, support for conventional military spending is lower compared to nuclear deterrence. It seems that the idea of nuclear deterrence is experiencing a renaissance of sorts, with growing support among citizens and politicians alike. And it's not just about public and political sentiment. Organizations like NATO are also emphasizing the importance of deterring Russian nuclear use. There's a call for dialogue both within and outside the alliance to advance the concept of deterrence. So what we're seeing is a seismic shift in attitudes, a shift that's reshaping Europe's approach to nuclear deterrence. This shift in attitudes is reshaping Europe's approach towards nuclear deterrence. This change, though complex and multifaceted, is a crucial part of understanding the future of nuclear deterrence in Europe. We are witnessing a renaissance of the idea of nuclear deterrence. Yes, you heard that right. A concept that was met with skepticism and protest during the 70s and 80s is now experiencing a resurgence in support. This shift is not without reason. The landscape of international defense and diplomacy is not what it was in the past. It's constantly evolving, and the strategies need to adapt accordingly. Now let's talk about the growing support for nuclear deterrence. It's no secret that the European public's perspective on nuclear weapons has shifted in recent years. The catalyst? The Russian invasion of Ukraine. This event made many realize the importance of a robust defense strategy. What was once seen as a dangerous and unnecessary risk, nuclear weapons, is now being seen as a vital deterrent. This shift isn't confined to public opinion alone. The political realm is also experiencing this change. The attitude towards nuclear deterrence in Europe has seen a significant upturn. The increased support for the deterrent effect of nuclear weapons among citizens is mirrored in the political sphere. Poland's interest in hosting nuclear weapons under NATO's nuclear sharing policy is a testament to this trend. In this changing landscape, NATO plays a pivotal role. The alliance emphasizes the importance of deterring Russian nuclear use. It's not just about possessing nuclear weapons, but about using them as a deterrent. As the old saying goes, the best defense is a good offense. This is precisely what nuclear deterrence aims to achieve. But it's not just about deterrence. Dialogue, both within and outside the alliance, is equally important. Advancing the concept of deterrence requires open and constructive conversations. It's about finding a balance between the need for security and the desire for peace. The renaissance of nuclear deterrence is transforming Europe's defense strategies. It's a shift that brings with it a myriad of challenges and opportunities. As we navigate through this new era, it's crucial to remember that the ultimate goal remains the same: a secure and peaceful Europe. As we look towards the future, the question remains: what role will nuclear deterrence play in Europe's security? Peering into the crystal ball of the future, we find a landscape of potential scenarios, each with its implications, and each requiring careful strategic planning. The resurgence of nuclear deterrence in Europe is not merely a return to Cold War dynamics, but rather a complex interplay of old and new factors, woven together in a tapestry of 21st century geopolitics. One possibility is the continued expansion of nuclear deterrence policies among European nations. This scenario is underpinned by the belief that a strong deterrent, the threat of mutual annihilation, is the most effective safeguard against nuclear aggression. Under this scenario, countries like Poland, stirred by the specter of nuclear-armed neighbors, may indeed host nuclear weapons under NATO's nuclear sharing policy. Another potential future could be characterized by a push for nuclear disarmament. This would involve international diplomacy, negotiations, and perhaps even a new treaty or agreement aimed at reducing nuclear arsenals and de-escalating tensions. This path is laden with challenges, not least the need for trust and transparency among nations historically marred by suspicion and rivalry. But perhaps the most likely scenario is a combination of these two: a delicate balance of deterrence and diplomacy. This would mean maintaining a credible nuclear deterrent while simultaneously pursuing dialogue and cooperation aimed at reducing the risk of nuclear conflict. In any case, the need for continued dialogue, both within and outside of alliances like NATO, is paramount. The conversation about nuclear deterrence in Europe is not just about military strategy, it's about the kind of future we want to build, the kind of world we want to live in. It's a conversation about security, sure, but it's also about peace, about cooperation, about shared values and shared threats. The future of nuclear deterrence in Europe is uncertain, but its relevance in shaping Europe's security cannot be understated. The stakes are high, and the challenges are many, but with careful strategic planning and open dialogue, Europe can navigate the uncertain waters of the nuclear age.